Hi, everyone. Matthew DeSantis here with NYRA Bets, here with another episode of Countdown to the Cup to get you ready for the 2024 Breeders' Cup at Del Mar on Friday, November 1st and Saturday, November 2nd. This episode is looking at trainer Todd Pletcher and his previous successes at the Breeders' Cup, as well as his roster of 2024 contenders and how they may very well fare out where the turf meets the surf at Del Mar. Now, before we get to that, make sure to press that like button and subscribe to the NYRA Bets YouTube channel. Subscribing is completely free of cost and just notifies you when new videos drop. And man, do we have a lot dropping. In addition to these trainer-specific videos, we have some breaking news about Idiomatic being retired and obviously will be out of the Distaff. We also have a video going over the pre-entries for all 14 Breeders' Cup races. We have top 5 videos. Next week, we're going to have Breeders' Cup Classic Contender videos, long shot videos, capping the card for Friday and Saturday. A lot of content. Make sure to subscribe today. All right. Like I said, we're going to talk about trainer Todd Pletcher today. And obviously, a high-profile trainer has brought so many horses to the Breeders' Cup over the years. But there's always a but. Might not have had the amount of success you would expect a trainer bringing this many horses to have. And so when you dive into the numbers of Todd Pletcher's career at the Breeders' Cup, I do think it's notable. 173 starters. He brings a lot. Only 15 victories, 8.7% win percentage. That is notable, in my opinion, for a couple of reasons. One, it's below what we see many of the other top trainers have. Most of the other top trainers, Steve Asmussen, Bill Mott, Aidan O'Brien, Chad Brown, certainly Brad Cox and Charlie Appleby, but even others, usually somewhere between 10 and 13%. Usually maybe that 11, 12, 13 rate. Bob Baffert's usually around 12%. So a little bit lower. Now, 49 for 173 in the money. Okay, so you're getting about 28% of his starters to hit the board. Again, why is this notable? Like I said, a little bit lower than other trainers. The other thing is he often does have horses, multiple horses running in the same division. So that win percentage is always going to take a little bit of a hit because he's got 2 or 3 horses potentially running against each other in that regard. So even when one of them wins, that means by default, 2 of them have to lose. So there is some of that goes on here. But one of the things I will tell you, and this is very true of Todd Pletcher's numbers at the Kentucky Derby as well. It's really remarkable. Pletcher, he's a trainer that I can understand why owners love him because he gets you to the big game. Doesn't win the big game very often, but he gets you to the big game. He gets you to the Kentucky Derby. He gets you to the Breeders' Cup. The man knows how to manage his roster of horses as well as anyone out there. He knows how to maximize their opportunities to get to the Breeders' Cup, to get to the Kentucky Derby. His Kentucky Derby record is not that great, but he's got a lot of runners every year. He's got a lot of contenders every year. He's got multiple horses in the starting gate most years because he knows how to get a horse to the Kentucky Derby. Doesn't mean they're always going to win, and it doesn't mean they're supposed to win either. It doesn't mean they're the best horse. Even when in the last couple of years with Forte and Fierceness, he had a heavily hyped horse going into that race. But he knows how to get them there, which is what owners want. Owners want to run their horses on the biggest days to go, I have a Breeders' Cup starter, I have a Breeders' Cup winner, I have a Breeders' Cup contender, I have a Kentucky Derby contender. That's what owners want. That's what Todd Pletcher gives you. He knows how to navigate these races, whether it's the Breeders' Cup Challenge Series races, we're going to talk about that in a second, or whether it's the Kentucky Derby prep races. So the man can get you to the big game. Doesn't mean he wins all the time, but he knows how to get you there. And to be fair to him, many times I would argue his horses are overbet. So he has that 8.7% win rate, but I would also say a lot of times his horses are not meant to be the winners of these races. That 8.7 is about right when you bring this many. In other words, he's bringing a lot of horses that kind of barely squeak in, or that you go, this horse probably is a little cut below everybody else, but he's bringing a big contingent most years. It is the downside of success, perhaps. The downside of his success is that his win rate is going to be a little bit lower. I just have a feeling. So one of those things. Now, out at Del Mar in 2017 and 2021 when it was hosted out there, does have a win with 8 starters, and 3 of his 8 starters hit the board. So did pretty well those 2 years. Again, showing the East Coast horsemen can ship out to Del Mar, have success. Pletcher doesn't ship out west very often outside of the Breeders' Cup. Does every once in a while. Every once in a long while, you'll see him have a horse out at Santa Anita or Del Mar, but it is rare outside of the Breeders' Cup for him to run out in California. But good to see that he's had success out there, at least getting this horse across the wire first. Now let's talk about who he's bringing this year. And he's got a stable of 6 horses that are coming. And it's interesting to see the 6 that are coming. And it speaks to that previous slide a little bit with regards to particularly a horse like Mentee and maybe even Tenacious Leader. Some of the juveniles are kind of interesting to see, kind of getting them into these races and whether or not they're going to be able to stack up, etc. So, but we're going to start at the top with Fierceness. And this is a horse that's going to take up a lot of discussion. Obviously was your favorite in the Kentucky Derby. Before that was your Breeders' Cup Juvenile winner last year at Santa Anita. So you know he can ship west. You know he can run out in California. And is coming off a thrilling win over Torpedo Anna in the Travers last time out. He is a horse that prior to that Travers had alternated between greatness and frustration. That every other race, there was an excuse. Every other race, there was a dazzling display. It was one or the other. It was boom or bust with him. And finally in the Travers, he put together 2 back-to-back quality starts with the Jim Dandy and then the Travers, winning both of those up at Saratoga. Now, he might just like Saratoga. That's distinctly possible because he's always done well up at the Spa. And that is something to consider that I don't want to say is a horse for course because he's won at Gulfstream Park. He's won at Santa Anita. He's won other places. But he broke his maiden at Saratoga, and he got back to Saratoga this summer, wins the Jim Dandy and the Travers up there over Sierra Leone, over Torpedo Anna, and has proven to be, I would say at this point, probably your top 3-year-old. Dornick retires a little bit early before the Breeders' Cup. Obviously, that's a horse with 2 Grade 1 wins. Seize the Gray also has 2 Grade 1 wins as a 3-year-old, but is going to the Dirt Mile. A lot of people will discount that as a result. But like I said, Fierceness, a really interesting horse. And I want to show you the Travers. And I want to show you the start of the Travers because I think this is critical when talking about his chances in the Breeders' Cup Classic. Because I'll be honest, I was not necessarily thrilled about him going 1.25 miles. I didn't think he would like that distance in the Travers. He ultimately got the job done at that distance in the Travers. But let's watch the start of this race. And of course, that's the finish. But here's the start of the race. And he's in the far outside post, which I think is so critical. And he's doesn't go straight to the lead. You see, Johnny's got him under a pretty tight hold. He's not really asking him to do too much. Just get out there. Batten Down and Dornick are going. And what does Fierceness do? He sits wide. He sits 3 wide going into the first turn. And he's in no hurry to save ground, as we thought he might. Oh, he's on the outside post. He's going to want to go to the front. He's going to want to save ground going into that first turn. No, it's not what he did. What Fierceness likes to do is have a clean trip. Now, that doesn't have to be on the lead. That can be tracking the pace, which is exactly what he did in that race. He tracked the pace and could sit third, going 3 wide around both turns. Now turning for home, now we're going to cue that one up. And now turning for home, he's still 3 wide, taking over Batten Down and Dornick coming for home. And he's been wide this whole trip, but look, he's clean up front. He's not gotten any kickback. He's stayed out of trouble. And that's been a key thing. And Johnny Velasquez even said it. He goes, when we've stopped asking the horse to do the things he doesn't want to do, he responds beautifully. But he wants to do what he wants to do. Now, he ends up holding off a very game Torpedo Anna here down the stretch just to barely win at the wire at that 1.25 miles. You saw Sierra Leone cross the wire third there, about 1.5 lengths back. But listen, Fierceness is a horse. He's going to be post position dependent, in my opinion, in the Classic. If he draws an outside post, I love it. If he draws an inside post, that's going to be tough, especially the presence of somebody like Arthur's Ride, who's probably faster into the first turn than he is. and is going to be maybe more intentional about getting into the first turn than he is. Remember, intentionality is a lot more important than looking at a time form US early pace rating. Some of my colleagues just look at that and they go, oh, it can possibly be faster or slower than this other horse. Intentionality, that matters. And so Arthur Dryde is going to be intentional about getting to the front because he needs the lead. Fierceness, as we saw, doesn't need the lead at all and can sit off the pace. So it did it last year in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, did it in the Travers, did it in the Jim Dandy, can win off the pace. That's not a problem. But I think he needs to be outside. If he's inside, I just think there's going to be too much traffic to contend with. You're going to have other horses crashing down on him potentially. It just makes it a little bit more sticky. Now, another horse that will probably benefit from drawing outside is Tapit Trice. This is a horse that will benefit from drawing wide, and it's because he is one that has a big loping stride, and he's never been a particularly agile horse or an athletic horse, and he's a horse that can be a little lumbering at times. But once he gets that stride to full extension, he gobbles up ground faster than most other horses. And his Woodward was particularly telling, and it's a prime example because it's both the best and the worst of Tapit Trice in a period of about 30 seconds. Because on one hand, he's stuck on the inside rail. He's not getting a particularly good ride. He was just steadied by Dylan Davis going into that far turn, and he's sitting last in a 4-horse field. He's taking kickback behind horses, and he's not really in a great spot. And he's kind of now trying to go in between. Skippy Longstocking's up on the lead, and at this point, you go, Skippy's going to win this race. But all of a sudden, Dylan finally gets this horse kind of angled out, and finally at this point gets him angled out in the clear, and look what starts happening. Now, Skippy's stride starts to shorten for sure, but Tapit Trice just starts motoring, and that's what this horse can do. This horse can absolutely start mowing people down in the stretch. Has done it throughout his career. If you remember that very thrilling Tampa Bay Derby victory that he had, where he completely blew the brake and then passed everybody coming for home. And it was a visually stunning effort. He's always had that ability. The problem is he's been his own worst enemy sometimes. Jockey Club Gold Cup, inside post position. The race before that, took a lot of kickback, didn't really like it, finished 4th, not his best effort. The race before that, in the Monmouth Cup, outside post position, able to stay in the clear, able to track the pace, was able to keep that long motion in unencumbered, and was able to pull away in the stretch as a result. Irad Ortiz Jr. is riding. I think Tapit Trice has a chance to upset and surprise people. I know that some people think I'm nuts for thinking that, and that's understandable. But I really do think he's a horse that I have no questions about the 1.25 mile distance with him. And I have very little question about as long as he draws an outside post, I think he's going to get a really good trip. So those are the two classic contenders that Pletcher has. And certainly they're going to, like I said, Fierceness is going to take up a lot of conversation. It's going to be among your top 2 or 3 choices. I would imagine Forever Young and City of Troy are going to be up there as well. Highland Falls will be a major consideration for Brad Cox. But Fierceness is going to be among your top choices in the Breeders' Cup Classic. Tapit Trice, much more of a long shot. Now let's talk a little bit about Grand Sonata. This is an interesting horse that Pletcher brings to the Breeders' Cup, and a horse that's coming off a win last time out in on the turf at Kentucky Downs. But really before that was a horse that kind of had a reputation for not winning much, and had won, like I said, won at Kentucky Downs, that Turf Cup. But you go back to his previous win, it was against $80,000 optional claiming company, getting Lasix last August at Saratoga. And his last win before that was in the Kitten's Joy in February 2022. So this horse does not win often, okay? And, can run well sometimes. He does have a little bit of an on-off pattern in recent starts. But, he can run well. He's certainly, graded stakes placed and a grade 2 to grade 3 winner in his own right. But interesting to see. This is a horse that really, that effort out of Kentucky Downs really kind of popped off the page to me. He ran really well in the United Nations for sure, but Three back at Monmouth, but that Turf Classic, or that Turf Cup, I should say, was, like I said, probably his best start. And in that Turf Cup, and we're going to take a look at that right now, he starts coming up, and it's an effort that, like I said, it kind of surprised me a little bit, because he's not a horse that wins very often. And you don't know what you're going to expect out of those horses at Kentucky Downs sometimes, in terms of whether or not they're going to like the surface, whether or not they're going to like the conditions. But he's there on the inside and really battling all throughout and able to hold on. Now, it's notable that people who follow Kentucky Downs closely will tell you there might have been a little bit of a inside bias on the rail at Kentucky Downs during this meet. So maybe that horse benefited from that. He's going to be a long shot in this race. I don't necessarily like his chances here. This is going to be a really significant class test for Grand Sonata, who every other time this horse has run up against grade one competition, it's not gone particularly well. Finished sixth by 7 3/4 lengths in the Turf Classic last year at Belmont at the Big A, granted over a yielding turf course, but then even two back of the Sword Dancer at Saratoga finished fifth by 9 lengths behind Far Bridge, who's also in this race, measured time in Silver Knot. So, it's going to be a tough road for Grand Sonata in this spot. You have some really nice European horses coming over. Whether you have a horse like Continuous, obviously you have a horse like Emily Upjohn, who might very well end up running in the affiliated mare turf instead. But you have Farbridge, you have Gold Phoenix as American horses, and then you have horses like Illinois and Luxembourg. That there's just going to be a very tough race, and then Rebels Romance, obviously, for Charlie Appleby. So that turf shaping up pretty tough. This one I don't give much of a chance to for Pletcher. Now let's go to a horse whose fortunes might have changed a little bit, and that is Candied. Now, Candied, last time out, finished third in the Spinster, is in the Distaff. Why do I say her fortunes might have changed? Well, because Idiomatic is no longer in that race. Now, Torpedo Anna is still in that race, but I think it could have an impact on how well Candied performs, because Candied was no match for Idiomatic in the Spinster, but is a very good 3-year-old filly. Very good 3-year-old filly. And I want to show you the Alabama as well. And this was the effort two back. And you see her kind of on the outside here, on the outside of those front three. You get the bumping between Miss Justify and Chattelis there at the top of the stretch. And, Candied is kind of pretty beleaguered at this point. She does kind of stagger around in the middle of the track a little bit, and was your 9-5 favorite that day. Power Squeeze comes running and looks at this point like Power Squeeze is going to just run by easily. Candied really fights her all the way to the wire, loses the bob, but I thought that was a really gutsy effort for Candied, who sat up near the pace, and ultimately the race was won by a horse that closed from the back. So I thought Candied showed a little bit of ability in that race, and it was always a horse that had run second to Torpedo Anna before and things like that, but it was always kind of second fiddle to Torpedo Anna. Now, last time out in the Spinster, again, you see her make kind of try to make the same move. She makes a move up against Idiomatic, and then Idiomatic's just like, no, I was just kidding. See you guys later. And just kind of blew away the competition at this point. So I think that, she was just absolutely no match for Idiomatic in the Spinster for sure. And she ends up holding on for third in this particular race. But I still wonder if Candied is good enough to really compete at the highest level against older fillies and mares. That said, this Distaff does seem a little lesser. You have Torpedo Anna. You have a horse like Raging Sea, who, by the way, looked certainly anything from intimidating last time out in the Beldame, winning at 1-9, but barely winning that race at all. And so that was not a great effort from her after she won the personal ensign over Idiomatic in a race where Idiomatic kind of won the battle with Randomized, but lost the war in terms of going too fast up front in the early portions of that race. Now, can Candied kind of continue to grow and develop? Outside of Torpedo Anna, there's not a lot else in this race. Like I said, you could look at a horse like Raging Sea. I think the Japanese horse, Awesome Result, is a very good filly as well, who's 4 years old, coming off of a grade 1 win over in Japan, a perfect 7 for 7. But, if Torpedo Anna doesn't fire her best shot, that Distaff is a lot more open now, and Candied certainly could be a horse that benefits, has a useful running style, and really doesn't turn in many bad performances. But again, would need to get faster. The career best 91 buyer is going to need to improve a little bit more. Obviously, no match for Idiomatic that last time out, but interesting to see nevertheless. Now let's talk about the final two horses here, the two juveniles, Mentee and Tenacious Leader. And what makes them so interesting is that I thought Mentee would go to the Juvenile Turf Sprint. And I say that because of what I saw Mentee do in the Hopeful, which was Mentee tracking the early pace, going 7 furlongs. And at the top of the stretch, you see the Rapoli Silks there in the middle. And then Mentee decides, something, 7 furlongs seems like a little too long. Maybe I'll turn it in, back it in right now. And so Mentee just kind of goes, okay, that's enough of that. Remember, Mentee set the course record at Aqueduct for 5 furlongs in debut, but was nearly nabbed at the wire doing so, going up front. In this race, you see Chancellor McPatrick, you see Ferocious, you see a few other horses go by. Then you see Mentee trot across the line well back. And so I thought, something, this horse is just a sprinter, doesn't want to go 2 turns. This was further confirmed next time out in the Futurity. They switched the horse to turf, and Mentee looks like a natural turf horse suddenly. Again, tracking the pace, nearly the exact same trip in the middle, those Rapoli orange and blue silks, and then just puts away the other horse that was up on the lead, Epitaph, and ends up drawing off to win this Pilgrim by the Futurity, I should say, by 3 lengths, and does it easy. And I said, hey, this looks like a Juvenile Turf Sprint horse. Now, the horse is entered in the Juvenile Turf Sprint, but the first preference for Mentee is the Juvenile Turf. That seems like a tall order, in my opinion. Going 2 turns, I don't know if that's what this horse wants to do. You usually can get more distance out of a horse on turf than you can on dirt, so maybe there's some logic to that. But I still am a little bit worried about that. And also, I don't know how that early speed would play at Del Mar. Through the 2 Breeders' Cups hosted at Del Mar, no horse has ever gone gate to wire going 2 turns on the turf. So something to keep in mind there. I think he'd be better in the Juvenile Turf Sprint, but that's just my opinion. And I obviously could be wrong about that. Maybe this horse will be able to get some more ground in that Juvenile Turf, or maybe they end up, I don't know. Like I said, their first preference is the Juvenile Turf. We'll see if they end up in the Juvenile Turf Sprint somehow or the other. Now, the other horse that I think is quite fascinating here is Tenacious Leader. And I say that because Tenacious Leader ran a really good race, I thought, 2 back, when the horse ran second to Zulu Kingdom in the With Anticipation, and then went and ran in the Breeders' Futurity and went back to the dirt. Now, the horse broke its maiden on the dirt, but did so in an off-turf race, up at Saratoga, and was just no match for the competition, though, in the Breeders' Futurity. Like I said, ran really well against Zulu Kingdom in that With Anticipation, which we have right here. And again, you can see Tenacious Leader kind of up on the lead here and has that really effective, it was stalking the pace that day. Zulu Kingdom kind of diving down on the inside and is going to come through on the rail. And Tenacious Leader, again, you kind of think maybe is packed in here, is done. Zulu Kingdom's going to pull away, but Tenacious Leader keeps fighting, keeps running, makes this final margin a lot closer than I think people thought it was going to be. Obviously, the ground saved by Zulu Kingdom certainly benefited that horse. Tenacious Leader giving up a little bit more ground that day by going outside, but has a useful running style, can track the pace, seems to be best on the turf. Certainly that was the intentionality for trainer Todd Pletcher that whole time, of wanting to get that horse on the turf, even running in that race that was taken off the turf, etc. And then running in the With Anticipation, where we should say the horse actually went off as the 9-5 favorite over Zulu Kingdom in that race. I thought a really gutsy effort there. I think this horse is a little bit interesting. And I think this horse could surprise at a little bit more of a price. Obviously, the Europeans are going to be very difficult to get around in this race. I'm maybe less bullish on Zulu Kingdom. I think the horse stepped back a little bit last time out over yielding surface in the Pilgrim. And the horse just does not win impressively over here. And honestly, probably should have gotten beat by Noble Confessor, who's another Todd Pletcher horse. Probably, could have gotten beat by Tenacious Leader 2-back. So I do wonder if that horse maybe is as good as everybody thinks. And like I said, obviously the big, bads out there in terms of the Euros are going to have a lot to say about who ends up winning this race, whether you're looking at a horse like, Henry Matisse or some of these other Aidan O'Brien, Charlie Appleby horses that might be coming over. So you got, Al Quadra is another one who's really tough. And then New Century is another horse who I really like for Andrew Balding, who won the Grade 1 Summer. So that's going to be a tough road for Tenacious Leader to go against. But I think a horse that clearly has some talent. And I like going back onto the turf here. Glad that that's the move that Todd Pletcher and his connections have decided to make. All right. Well, listen, that's going to do it for this episode of Countdown to the Cup, previewing the Todd Pletcher trainees and contenders for 2024. Hope you enjoyed it. Make sure to press that like button and subscribe to the NYRA Bets YouTube channel today to get all of our great content on the Breeders' Cup and other races and tracks beyond, as well as handicapping and betting tutorials. My name is Matthew DeSantis, wishing you a great and prosperous day at the races, and reminding you, friends, it's now post time.